new paths would be introduced in response to demand. First, these new paths became available about a month ago. The Engaging Humor Path is designed to help us build skills as humorous and engaging public speakers. The projects focus on understanding our sense of humor and how that sense of humor translates to engaging audience members. This evening, Lloyd will begin level 1 of the Engaging Humor Path with the Icebreaker Project. This same project is actually the starting part of all the paths and for the Confident Communicator Manual and the Legacy Educational Program. Lloyd has done 9 icebreakers, 2 in Pathways and 7 in the Legacy Program. Obviously, the challenge is to say something different, ideally linked to the new path. Lloyd Smith, and not his first rodeo, Lloyd Smith.
At the contest on Saturday, I was asked a question during the contestant interview phase where they wait for the tallying of all the points and whatnot that I've been asked many times before in the interviews. How do you get your speech ideas? So that's what I decided to talk about since I've never done that on one of my previous icebreakers. I figured it's a way to introduce you to my thought processes, which may or may not be a wise idea. But anyway, I'm going to do it. The interesting thing about getting speech ideas is that that's been a problem or an issue forever. Aristotle wrote an entire chapter in his classic rhetoric text called The Rhetoric about what he called invention or generation, how to come up with topics. And he didn't know when you get down to it, which is much like a lot of the rest of the stuff Aristotle wrote. But it does seem like a mysterious process, but it's really not. For this contest speech, I decided, well, about 2 or 3 months ago, I guess it was, I decided I better start thinking about a speech idea. So I pulled out the kind of a folder or package of bits and pieces of speeches, things I found in magazines and newspapers, weird stuff I've seen online and printed out and like that. It's probably about that thick. And I leafed through it and I found 3 things that I thought that would be pretty good for a humorous speech. One of them was an oddity in baseball. There's a little known fact. There have been about 220,000 professional baseball games in the last 150 years. There are exactly 3 of them that were forfeited due to fan rioting during the game. And there was 1 player who happened to be on the field in each of those 3 games, Rusty Torres, a guy you've never heard of. And I thought, that would be a pretty good one. And it did turn out pretty good, except I couldn't squeeze it down to less than about 900 words. And when I pushed it down farther than that, the funniness went out of the stories. It's hard to describe Death to Disco Night in Chicago in 1971 without some detail. But, so I gave that one up. That's way too long for a contest speech. It's got to be closer to maybe 700 words, give or take, because the target for it's 6.5 minutes. So I abandoned that one, even though I thought it was pretty good. And then I had another idea based on something I saw online in a forum for retired teachers. What's the oddest thing a student ever said to you? There are lots of odd things students said to me. The time a kid was going down the hall holding a big lighter saying, "I'm a nymphomaniac, I'm a nymphomaniac." He missed it by that much. I was too polite to correct him, though, and he just kept moving. Or the time a kid asked me if I'd seen the new movie, The Last of the Mohicans. You know, Mo chickens, fewer chickens. He meant Mohicans. He didn't quite grasp how that should be said, I guess. The problem with that idea was that there was nothing to chain the odd things together. It just became a series of sort of like little anecdotes or one-liners, and that's specifically prohibited in the rules. There's an off chance that some of the judges might actually read the judging criteria and know that, so I decided that was a bad one. So I decided to use the third one, which was the one that is my contest speech, about the speech introductions and conclusions. Now the speech itself, how did I write it? I just wrote a narrative of what actually happened. There are people who asked me for advice about contest speeches. A couple of them have called me their speech guru. I read some stuff by the experts, the former world champions, about how to craft great speeches. It was all just obvious stuff. And they talked about introductions and conclusions, and the two stories I told about the kid who with the karate kick in the introduction, the other kid who threw up at the end of the speech for his conclusion, were just real. I just wrote them down the way they actually happened. I had to mess with it a little bit in order to get it down to the right time, and that was pretty much it. So the bottom line here, and I think this applies to everybody in the room, when you're trying to think up an idea for a speech, don't overthink it. Just use something out of real life. And it does pay to gather interesting and odd and bizarre things that you just happen to see. Things you happen to see in newspapers and magazines. They'll have to toss them in a file, and then you just have to flesh them out a little bit. It's really not that difficult. But the weird thing is, even in Toastmasters, one of the things people tell me the most is, I just can't think of a good idea for a speech. Well, of course you can. Tell a story about yourself. People love stories. That's what does.
We were so crazy busy getting a meeting organized. We needed to have